السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. So, inshallah, today we're going to resume from verse number 47. We covered 3 verses yesterday, so we're going to proceed, inshallah, with number 47. بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. يا أيها الذين أوتوا الكتاب آمنوا بما نزلنا مصدقا لما معكم من قبل أن نطمس وجوها فنردها على أدبارها أو نلعنهم كما لعنا أصحاب السبت وكان أمر الله مفعولا. The meaning of which is, O you who have been granted the book, do believe in what we have now revealed, which confirms the revelation which you already possess. Do this before we alter countenances, turning them backwards, or lay a curse upon them as we cursed the people of the Sabbath. Bear in mind that Allah's command is done. Now here we see a direct command to the people of the book. Previously we had spoken about how in this surah we have references to the people of the book and how they're taken to task for misinterpreting the book, taking verses of their scripture out of context and misrepresenting the message of the Torah, for example. Now here this is a direct address. In this verse, it's a direct address to the people of the book to believe. This how the verse starts out. Ya ayyuhalladhina utul kitaba aminu. Aminu is in the command form, right? It's not amanu. Amanu are like ayyuhalladhina amanu are those you who believe, right? Yani it's a sifa. Those who have already believed. It's in the verb form that describes the people of the iman. But here, the people of the book are addressed. Ya ayyuhalladhina utul kitaba aminu, right? Which means to command to believe. So this is a direct command to the people of the book to believe in what was given to the prophets and to believe in the Quran, of course, right? And the reason for that is actually clearly given in the verse. Why should they believe in what the Prophet has been given and in the Quran? Because it's musaddiqan lima ma'akum. It's very logical because it confirms that which you already have in your scripture. There is no logical basis to reject the message of the Quran because it is already confirming, further confirming what is already in their book. So to make the claim to Iman as An-Nisa did, they never said that we do not believe, or we are not people of faith, or we are not people of Scripture. They were proud of the fact that they were people of Scripture, people of revelation, who had received the greatest number of prophets. The Jewish people, to the point that they wanted the last prophet also to be from them. They knew a prophet was coming, but they just couldn't get over the fact that it was not from them, right? When it came from the line of Ismail, right? So this claim to Iman that they made is now being challenged when it is being asked of them to believe, because you already have with you that which is being confirmed by this Quran, right? So to claim belief while rejecting the Quran is a false claim. It has no credibility. And what it really points to is a deeper problem, a deeper psychological problem that they were having in terms of arrogance, in terms of rejecting the Prophet ﷺ, because they could not accept someone other than themselves to have this high ranking. Because when you acknowledge a prophet from other than your nation, you're acknowledging the superiority of that other. You're acknowledging the fact that they have been chosen this time and not you. So this was just too much for them to stomach. Right? They could not get over this and submit to the message of this time. Therefore, they chose to reject it. And subhanAllah, if you look at Ya ayyuhalladhina utul kitaba aminu, we see this in Surah Al-Baqarah as well, when Ahlul Kitab are actually addressed. It's always what is being appealed to is them being bearers of scripture. That is used as the basis for them being the first, that they should be the first to respond, right? The appeal is made when they're asked to believe, the appeal is made to them being bearers of scripture. Because you have the book, you should be the first to believe, right? And this is, we also see this theme in Surah Al-Baqarah as well. And because whenever there is greater reason to believe, but it does not follow Iman, it does not follow submission, the person does not become Islam, then the punishment is also greater for that rejection. Because that rejection is more serious. There was less justification for that rejection. There was less justification sin that they then fell into. And there's actually a legal maxim in Islam. When you study fiqh, those are basically the fiqh is like the easier part, which is the ahkam, right? Legal rulings, halal, haram, mustahab, makruh, mubah, right? 5 categorizations of every action that is halal, haram, recommended, or disliked, or jaiz, or permissible, those 5 categories. Now, to study fiqh is one thing, but then to study usul al-fiqh is the science of the methodology of deriving those principles that then are the framework for fiqh, right? One of the qawaid of usul principles we have in usul al-fiqh is that when there is greater temptation for us to commit a sin, but a person still resists, the reward is greater because the temptation is greater. Similarly, when there is less reason for you to sin, when it's not, the temptation is not as strong, there's less justification for you to sin, but you still sin, you still commit that act, then the punishment is also greater, right? And this is why we have the case of Yusuf alayhi salam, when he was called by the wife of Aziz to commit the sin that she was calling him to. It is said that his sabr in resisting that temptation was greater than the sabr when he was thrown into the well. Because when he's thrown into the well, there's something beyond his control. He can't really do anything except make dua and wait for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to save him and be delivered. So he has to be patient, right? There's nothing else he can do. But with the wife of Aziz, there was an element of choice. Right, he could have done whatever he wanted to, right, at that time, but still he resisted. So when the temptation is greater and there is still resistance or abstinence to sins, then the reward is greater. Contrast that with the case of zina, the case of fornication, for someone who is elderly. In the hadith, there's a reference to a person who commits zina, but the term used is sheikh al-zani, right, which in Arabic, sheikh means old man. It doesn't mean, linguistically, it doesn't mean how we use it. We use it to refer to a scholar. Sheikh or sheikh as a male scholar. That's how we use the term today. And it is acceptable usage, commonplace today. But linguistically, if you look at the meaning of the word sheikh in the Arabic language, it means an old man, an old person. So this is how the hadith has used that term, sheikh al-zani, right? The sheikh and the elderly man who commits zina. This is one of the worst types of zina, because there should be at that stage, at that age, the person is old, when they've probably been married and have children. There is less reason to fall into that type of sin. So this is a principle that we have in usul al-fiqh, is that the greater the temptation, and if sin is still avoided, the greater the reward. The less the temptation, the less reason or justification to sin, and you still fall into sin, the greater the punishment of that sin. And this is kind of what is happening here with the Ahlul Kitab, because it's being said to them, right? Because you have the book, you have less reason to reject, you have the most reason to believe. You should be the first to fall into this fold, and if you are not, then obviously this is going to lead to something extremely harmful for their right, in this world and in the next. And this is already alluded to, the punishment is already alluded to within the verse. It says, مِنْ قَبْلِ أَنْ نَطْمِسَ وُجُوهَا فَنَوْضَعَ عَلَى أَدْبَارِهَا وَنَلْعَنَهُمْ كَمَا لَعَنَّا أَصْحَابَ السَّبْتِ. Very, very scary, graphic punishment that is mentioned. If you look at the translation of these words, it says, do this, and believe, before we alter faces, turning them backwards, or lay a curse upon them as we cursed the people of the Sabbath. So, مِنْ قَبْلِ أَنْ نَطْمِسَ وُجُوهَا, to change the faces, it is said that the Tafsir, as a punishment for their rejection, just like they changed the truth, their faces would be changed as a punishment as a result. There's another principle we have, al-jazaa min jinsi al-amal. Very, very famous, often quoted principle. And it means that the jaza, or the recompense, is according to the type of action that is performed by the person. Al-jazaa min jins al-amal. Jins, it means like, jinsiya is like ethnicity in spoken Arabic today. So jins means kind or type. So al-jazaa, which you all understand, min from jins, same type of amal. So according to the amal or the action that you actually sent forward, you have recompense according to that. So this is mentioned here, Sayyid Qutb rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions two possible meanings for this part of the verse, which is speaking about this graphic punishment. Number one, he says it can be taken literally. It may have a literal meaning, which would mean the obliteration of faces. So obliteration actually, like when you condemn a building, like when it's completely destroyed, it is said to be obliterated, right? So he said in the context of faces, that means removing or obliterating all distinct human features from the face, so that it is no longer recognizable as human. So this is a possible little meaning of the verse. And then the other meaning he presents is that it may be that it's meant metaphorically to obliterate the distinctive elements of insight and understanding, so that they will not be able to understand to the point that they will fall back into kufr, to fall back into a disbelief, into the state they were in before receiving the scripture. This is perhaps the scariest part of the punishment. This is the scariest aspect of the punishment, is to be bearers of the scripture, but then to treat it in a way that makes you, when you get punishment that you cannot see because your face looks human still. I can't tell from your appearance that anything horrible has happened to you. But what's happened to you is something even more horrible than what we can see, because it is as if you never received the scripture. This is your hal, the condition from the inside. It's as if you never received revelation as a community, as a people, as a nation. And this is probably the more catastrophic of the two types of possible punishments that they could receive. And I also further want to share with you another note on this. Another Tafsir mentions about this specific expression, which is to turn them backwards, to turn the faces backwards. It is mentioned that it could either be the features of the face are eliminated, this is what we already stated, and the whole face is turned around backwards towards the nape of the neck. So this is one possible interpretation. Or it may be that the face is entirely flattened, so that you would be able to tell that it's a person at all. And what was also mentioned in this context are the people who broke the Sabbath, right? So this is the other punishment that's mentioned. So are they going to cause disfigurement physically or internally? Or نَلَعَنَهُمْ كَمَا لَعَنَّا أَصْحَابَ السَّبْتِ, or that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to curse them in the way that they cursed the people who broke the Sabbath, right? We all know the story of them. People who broke the Sabbath, who found a loophole into working on the day of the Sabbath, which was the day reserved for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for worshiping only. And what was said to them? Right? So it was said to them, we said to them, become monkeys, right? They were changed, like physically changed into monkeys, and also pigs are also mentioned in another place. So what can and there's the fact that the verse ends with this, so as to leave no room for doubt for Allah's ability to cause this to happen, right? Bear in mind that Allah's command is done. Okay, the command of Allah is mafa'ula, is will be done. Kun fayakun concept, right? All he has to say be, and it is. So if he wanted, this could very well happen at any moment, anytime. There's a very interesting story of one of the Jewish people at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, when he heard this verse actually. He heard this verse being recited, and he said he wrote to Medina when he heard this verse being recited, when we just mentioned the punishment. So he said that I went home and I had a bath, I went straight and I had a bath, and I was feeling my face with my hands, fearing that it would have already been changed, fearing that it would already have been obliterated, any of the human features would have been taken away from it, and then I embraced Islam. This is Ka'ab al-Ahbab, who later became a Sahabi. He was one of the learned people of the scriptures, He's one of the famous names of those who were Jewish and then became Muslim. He's one of those who also have his name, one of the learned people of the Jewish community. So notice the first thing is he had a bath. Just like you're supposed to have a bath from states of ritual impurity, like janaba, like hayd, like nifas. Also, before you embrace Islam, you have to have a bath. This is one of those few things that it's thought to actually take a bath for to be purified to enter Islam. Okay, let's look at the next verse. Verse number 48. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَغْفِرُ أَن يُشْرَكَ بِهِ وَيَغْفِرُ مَا دُونَ ذَلِكَ لِمَن يَشَاءُ وَمَن يُشْرِكْ بِاللَّهِ فَقَدِ افْتَرَىٰ إِثْمًا عَظِيمًا. Surely Allah does not forgive that a partner be ascribed to Him, although He forgives any other sins for whomever He wills. He who associates anyone with Allah and His divinity has indeed forged a mighty lie and committed an awesome sin. Okay, now this verse 48 talks about shirk, and today I really want us to understand why shirk is the horrible thing that it is. You've heard since we were children that shirk is the only thing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not forgive. And we've accepted that all our lives. But today we want to understand why it is that shirk has the status among sins, that it is the only sin that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not forgive. And that too, if a person dies upon shirk. Yani dies upon shirk without having repented from it, right? If you repent, then even shirk is forgiven. Because many of the Sahaba, as you know, previously used to worship idols, right? But then, of course, when they embraced Islam, so this is the power of repentance. Repentance really is underappreciated by us, I think, collectively. Repentance is one of the most powerful cleansing tools of a believer, that it can even obliterate, efface something as serious as shirk. So, today we want to talk about why it is that if a person dies upon shirk, this is something that's going to ensure their permanence in the hellfire, right? Why is it that these people are never coming out? This will never ever be forgiven by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, to simplify, shirk is really giving and recognizing rights that belong only to Allah, to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? This is why shirk is called zulm, right? Zulm is considered, or oppression, right? Zulm is injustice or oppression. And what it really is, in a linguistic sense, is to put something where it does not belong. That's what zulm is at a linguistic level, right? Zulm is to put something, to give something, to place something that is not its rightful place, to put something where it should not be. So, shirk is placing rights of Allah and giving them to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to consider someone else other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as worthy of worship. So it's to scatter your ibadah. It's to scatter your love, to scatter your devotion, your submission to other than Him. Whereas He exclusively only deserves all of those rights, right? No one else. When la ilaha illallah, right? When there is no God but Him. No one else has this right. So when we falsely give, when someone falsely gives this right to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this becomes unacceptable to the point that it is punished by the fire of hell forever. Now, there are various points we can mention about shirk. I'll give you three. Number one, what it entails is a concoction or complete fabrication of another God besides Allah. This is the assumption of shirk. The first initial entry point assumption of shirk is the fabrication that there is another God besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? You cannot commit shirk unless you have already conceived of another deity, of another. So this is the entry point of shirk. And just look at the disgust that you feel just thinking about this. After knowing the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, after knowing Allah, after knowing who He is, just thinking about this gives you a feeling of disgust. Number two, then to grant His exclusive rights to other than Him. There's some repetition because I'm really summarizing these 3 points. So number two is then granting His exclusive rights to other than Him. Those rights belong only to Him. Why are you giving them to someone else? You have no right to do that. And number three, then forwarding various acts of worship to other than Allah. Those acts of ibadah which are reserved only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is actually, if you look at the Quraysh in Jahiliyyah, and the Jahiliyyah before Islam, this is what the Quraysh were doing, right? The Quraysh always believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? They always had Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, right? They always believed that Allah is the Rabb, that He is the one who sustains, He is the one who provides, and He is the one who maintains the universe. They never doubted this. They had that Tawheed. What they didn't have was Tawheed al-Ibadah, which is called Tawheed al-Rububiyyah. They did not then take that first tawheed to its next logical conclusion, which is that then only He is worthy of worship. So what we say, when we study Tawheed, we will come across this phrase. Tawheed al-Rububiyyah necessitates Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah. The fact that He is Rabb, in other words, the fact that He is Rabb necessitates, He is necessary. There can be no other logical conclusion than He only is the Ilah who's worthy of worship, right? This is where they were misled, right? This is what they failed to accept until the end. People like Abu Jahl, people like the leaders of the Quraysh, even Abu Talib, they died upon this. They did not complete the Tawheed. And also, it should include expecting favors or rewards from other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, one of the things we're told to do when we're fasting, when we're praying, like in Ramadan, you're supposed to have ihtisab from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, what does it mean? Man Sumara Ramadan ihtisab, man qama Ramadan ihtisab. The one who fasted Ramadan was ihtisab. One who stood in the night prayer, prayed ihtisab. It doesn't mean ihtisab in the sense of you take yourself into account. That is one meaning. But the intended meaning in these, in the meanings of these ahadith is that you are expecting your reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we are encouraged during our ibadah to hope and expect for the reward of every ibadah that we do. Because number one, there's so many psychological benefits to that, right? Number one, it makes it easier. Because when you can really visualize, when you really anticipate a reward for anything, for any act, a return for any investment, it automatically becomes easier to maintain that, right? So number one, it makes it easier in the immediate time that you're offering that worship. Number two, it facilitates istiqamah. It brings about istiqamah. Because every time you do it, there will be a reward, right? So there's this, and it's optimism, right? The Prophet also was an optimistic person. Throughout his life, throughout his sunnah, and he was very open about this actually, right? His optimism. He was not pessimistic in any sense. No one had as many trials and afflictions as he had, but no one yet smiled more than he did. There was one Sahabi, I forget his name, he always used to smile, like all the time, he would be smiling. I think I shared this in my story, right? And his wife said to him, why are you always smiling like you? I think you're foolish. You're always smiling for no reason. Why are you always smiling? She actually kind of took him to task for this. And he said, I saw the Prophet ﷺ, he was always like this. I never met him except that he was smiling. Right? So he was following Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And now it's like if you see a sheikh that's smiling, our children, they is he really a scholar, Mama? Does he really have knowledge? And when I think about how much stress he had in his life, how much difficulty and depth he had in his life. I mean, who among us knows of people who had to bury all of their children except one in their lifetime? The Prophet ﷺ buried all of his children except for Fatima. He was
orphaned by age of 6.
Yeah, exactly. Himself an orphan. From the beginning of his life. Who had more affliction and trial and tribulation? From the beginning of his child till the end, right? As a child, he was an orphan. As a father, he lost almost all his children. Even Ibrahim, right? Who died at a very tender age. Who died at the age that, where the children are very adorable, right? Before they become annoying, that very tender 18-month-old stage. It was at that point, before the terrible twos. He lost him at a very tender age, right? But in spite of all this, he was the most smiling of all people. So this points to another reservoir of energy and inner spiritual happiness that he was drinking from, right? Which is why he also had someone lisan, right? Where the Prophet ﷺ was the only one who was allowed to continue fasting even beyond Maghrib, right? For us, that's haram, right? So it's called someone lisan. And for us, we have to break our fast at Maghrib. In fact, it's one of the alamat or signs of khayr for the ummah is that they will do ta'jeed in fitr, right? Which is that they will hasten to break their iftar and getting the fast. But for him, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he was being, he had nutrition and then from another source. So all of this goes back to ihtisab. The reason we draw all this up is to have everything that you're doing has an ajr, has a reward. But with shirk, what happens is that you're expecting reward from other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Which is why one of the two conditions of acceptable ibadah, and all of us want our ibadah to be accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? There are really two conditions. And you've heard this from me over and over again in the past few years. It's just, so critical because without this, nothing is accepted. And number one is, it has to be on the sunnah of the Prophet, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, so bid'ah is rejected. And number two, it has to be with ikhlas. It has to be with sincerity. Sincerity, if you look at Qul Huwallahu Ahad, Allahu Samad, it's talking about tawheed. But the surah is named al-ikhlas. Because that's what al-ikhlas really is. Sincerity is when it is only done for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you do an action with sincerity, it means you have protected your tawheed during the completion of that act. So from the time you begin doing it till the end of that act, you have not done it for anyone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is very hard to do. Intention, he said, out of all the things in Islam, he said the hardest thing is the intention, is the niyyah, because you don't know when it's going to change. I might have come here sincerely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? I only want to be here for Him to get reward from Him, to learn His deen. But then somehow during the course of this lecture, my intention begins to change. Right? You have a waswas of shaitan, and changing your intention, polluting your intention, all to deplete your reward, all to chip away at your tawheed, at your sincerity. So this is why on the day of judgment it will be said to those people who will have worshipped or done anything for other than Allah. Now, it's possible that you do something for Allah and you also do it for someone else. It's possible. This is what pollution of niyyah is. This is what pollution of intention is for a Muslim. Because no Muslim says, I'm doing this for shaitan, Allah. No one does that, right? Obviously. But you begin to pray, and then someone walks in and you elongate your ruku', right? You begin to pray and you're going to just, recite Surah al-Ikhlas. But now you're going to say, let me recite al-Baqarah now, So changing your intention because of any external factors, right? But if you're going to recite al-Baqarah, you should still recite al-Baqarah. And even if someone walks in. Because the perfection of ikhlas is to not change your ibadah, shortening or lengthening, because of someone else. Right? This is the perfection of ikhlas. Because what happens is if I was going to recite al-Baqarah but someone walks in, I don't want to be showing off and reciting al-Baqarah with like perfect tajweed and perfect makharij, all of these things come into your mind, right? So you fear that and you say, okay, let me not recite, let me just do al-ikhlas or let this way. This is a much harder stage of ikhlas to perfect. It's easier to, it's harder to perfect the second aspect that was projected. There's a funny joke about a person who has fallen into this lack of sincerity in their ibadah. So they're praying in the masjid. I believe it's a joke, but it cannot be true. So they're praying, they go into ruku', right? So they elongate their ruku'. Now it's hard to have a long ruku', right? You can have a long qiyam because there's so much Quran to recite. You can have long sajda because you're so many du'as doing. But having a long ruku', subhanAllah, is still really a true worshipper, Zahid A'lam of Allah. So people come and notice, oh, mashallah, he is doing such a long ruku', never seen this before. So he gets in the middle of the ruku', he's like, I'm fasting too, right? So he goes up and he goes back down. Now, of course, that's a joke. But the point is, so on the day of judgment, what we said to these people is go to those for your reward now, for whom you did those acts of worship for dunya. Because there is nothing with Allah for those people. So striving for ikhlas in worship. And the reason, there are many different ways to tackle this problem of deficient ikhlas. One of them is to contemplate the weakness of the human being. Because if you're doing your act of worship for anyone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for another person, to impress them or for whatever status you want to achieve, realize that their extent of poverty and need for Allah is just the way yours is. So why would you do anything for other than Him when they are just as dependent on Him, right? This is one of the ways to expose shirk. This is one of the ways that shirk is actually exposed. And Allah hates this. Allah hates this, that, these rights that are only His be scattered, be lost in this way. And this is the reason why, how sometimes people asked, some non-Muslims, some mushrikeen, do so many works, acts of charity, do so much good in their lives, go through so much tragedy sometimes in their personal lives. It's all true. Now, for a believer, an affliction, a tragedy is a purification, right? We never have even a thorn that pricks us is actually a reward for us, right? But that doesn't happen to the non-Muslims, right? For them, afflictions is the affliction, suffering that they go through. So Shaykh Sadi really, he clarified this in the context of Tawheed. He says, فَلَا تَنْفَوْا الطَّاعَاتْ مِنْ دُونِ التَّوْحِيدِ وَلَا تُفِيدُهُ مَصَائِبْ شَيْئًا. Tragic statement that good deeds, good actions, whether that's charity or anything else, social service, etc., it brings about no benefit in the absence of Tawheed. That foundation is missing. وَلَا تُفِيدُهُ مَصَائِبْ شَيْئًا. Musiba, masa'ib, afflictions, difficulty, trials, tragedies, also bring them no benefit whatsoever. Whereas for us, subhanAllah, they're all deposited. They're all deposited in the future. And this is what makes afflictions somewhat bearable in the life of this world. You know, there are different levels of tragedy. We had a recent one in our community. As for those of you that attended the January halaqah, I had announced there was a brother who had been diagnosed with cancer, right? A 22-year-old brother. He passed away last Saturday.
I saw this on Facebook.
It's all over Facebook. It's all over Facebook. MashaAllah, extremely handsome, beautiful, religious, 22-year-old brother. I've known him since he was a baby. And he was the only brother of 4 sisters. And he was the youngest. After 4 sisters, he was born into the family. And I can't even look at a picture of him. It's just so tragic. Seeing his mother at the janazah, the only thing that brought me comfort was she has no idea how much reward has been deposited for her. She was so patient throughout the entire trial. So just this ihtisab, just this thought, this anticipation, a future reward that's being deposited, is the only thing that brings us comfort and consolation at a time where it's like the peak of human grief. But if that happens to a non-Muslim, we just don't have that comfort there. That because the tawheed is missing, the comfort is just not there. And similarly, in the context of tragedies occurring in the Muslim world, like what's happening in Syria and other places, I remember Sr Sumara Khan at the convention this year, he said that when the oppressor sees what is in store for them in Jannah, in paradise, it's just like when you see the du'as that were not answered in dunya, when you see the reward for all those du'as in akhirah, you're going to wish that none of your du'as had been answered, right? So oppression, injustice, suffering, trial, tribulation, no matter how bitter it is right now, it's all relative. It's all relative, right? And this is why the prophets of Allah are the most tried of all individuals, right? They have the highest ranks. So it's really all relative, but beneficial only in the presence of Tawheed. This is why we're talking about shirk. We're talking about shirk in this ayah. So we want to understand shirk and Tawheed and the benefits of Tawheed and what you become deprived of when you don't have it, when you fall into shirk. Now, another question comes up. This is probably going to be the last point that we talk about today. Why should it be mentioned in this context? We were just talking about Ahlul Kitab. Ahlul Kitab, the Jews and the Christians, generally do not consider themselves mushrikeen. They do not consider themselves polytheists. That's not how they categorize themselves. They'll be very offended if you would say that to them, if you would consider them that. Or I even ask them, are you like that? They would be very offended by that question. So why is it that shirk or the content, is being mentioned here in this context? So you have to look at other places in the Quran to understand this verse fully. And this is the last thing we're going to cover today, inshallah. The verse you have to look towards is Surah At-Tawbah, verse number 30. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَقَالَتِ الْيَهُودُ أُزَيْرٌ ابْنُ اللَّهِ وَقَالَتِ النَّصَارَى الْمَسِيحُ ابْنُ اللَّهِ. You don't have to find the verses. I'm only quoting a part of it. And I'll tell you what it means. It means, and the Yahud said that Uzayr is the son of Allah.
Which ayah?
This is ayah 30, Tawbah. Ayah 30. And the Nasara, the Christians said that Al-Masih, Isa, alayhi salam, is the son of Allah. Right? Now, aren't these Jews and Christians? And isn't this clear shirk? Right? Now, of course, it's not all of the Jewish community, right? That you have to understand. But we know what happened to the majority of the Christians, right? Christians, there's only one sect of Unitarians that believe that Isa alayhi salam is the prophet of Allah. But everyone else, as you're all aware of the position of Christianity. So the question now arises, وَقَالَتْ الْيَهُودُ أُزَيْرٌ ibn Allah. The Yahud, some of the Yahud said, Uzair is the son of Allah. Who is Uzair? This is a good question. We can't answer this question. Who is Uzair? He was someone, some of the sects within Judaism considered to be the son of God, right? Or they called him the son of God. So it's important to know Uzair is an important figure. Muslims also name their children after Uzair, right? So actually he lived in 450 BC, so about 450 years before Isa alayhi salam. So he lived in the time period between Sulaiman and Dawood, that time period, and then Yahya and Zakaria, right? Because right after Yahya and Zakaria we have Isa. So he's a few hundred years before that. So he's in between this time period, between Sulaiman and Dawood and before Yahya and Zakaria alayhi salam. So he's like in the middle. He lived in a very difficult time actually. This is when the scripture, the Torah, had been lost to the Yahud. He came at a time after the captivity of the Jewish people in Babylon. Those of you who are familiar with the history, the Jewish people lived as a client state to the Assyrian Empire, right? And one of the provinces of the Assyrian Empire who the Jewish people were under was Babylon. So you know how there would always be wars between the main government, the main control, versus like the provinces. They would try to seize power. So one of the provinces, Babylon, actually overthrew the main Assyrian power, right, that they were supposed to be under. And after this began a period of captivity for the Jewish people, and their nobles were then taken to Babylon and exiled there. This is their period of captivity. It was at the end of the this is the 7th century BC. So this is all before Isa alayhi salam, right? And Babylon is in present-day Iraq. It's about 55 miles south of Baghdad. So this was considered to be like Mesopotamia, near the Euphrates. In the ancient world, we didn't have Iraq, we had Mesopotamia. So it was near the Euphrates at that time. So the important part being that the Jewish people at this time in their history was a very difficult time for them because they had lost the Torah. They had lost many of their traditions. Again, these are recipients of revelation. These are progeny of many of them, progeny of the prophets at that time. And they had even lost their language. The Hebrew language was even lost to them. So it was Uzair, who actually in Jewish scripture is called Ezra. E-Z-R-A, Ezra. So he was the one who then came back and rewrote the Old Testament. He was the one who revived the law. So he is an extremely respected figure in all of Judaism. Now one sect went astray and said that he's the son of God, right? But in all of Judaism, he is an extremely revered, respected, deeply respected figure because of the revival that he in fact brought about at that time. They were in deep need of that. Now, this is why here, and this background I'm giving you historically is for you to understand why this verse comes up in the context of Adam and Eve. Shirk is being mentioned. Why? Because a group of them, in fact, fell into shirk. Not all of them, a group of them. And it was the group that claimed that Uzair was the son of God. Now, another question comes up about Uzair and his status in Islam. Allahu Alam, he's not in the official list of prophets in Islam. So Allahu Alam as to his real status, but we do see him as a righteous figure, someone who did a great deal of work in terms of revival of the Torah at the time when they were in desperate need of that. Okay, now to complete our discussion of shirk, we want to mention one of the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. And this right is going to also explain why this verse occurs here. And that right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Shari'. Sheen alif ra ayn.
Sharia. This is the same root word that this comes from, as they're saying that Sharia comes from, right? Sharia is the legislator, right? The one who legislates. It's ism al-fa'il, right? It's the one who legislates. So Allah only exclusively has the right of legislation. What do we mean by right of legislation? Halal and haram. Only Allah says this is halal, and Allah says this is haram. No one else has the right to change that. If you give that right to someone else, you have associated partners with God, because this is His exclusive right. Look at the next verse, for those of you that were at Tawbah 30. Look at Tawbah 31. اتخذوا أحبارهم ورهبانهم أربابا من دون الله والمسيح ابن مريم وما أمروا إلا ليعبدوا الله إلها واحدا والمسيح ابن مريم وما أمروا إلا ليعبدوا الله إلها واحدا. Okay, now what does this mean? They and the Ahlul Kitab, they took their ahbar, their priests and their rabbis as arbab. Arbab is plural of rabb, right? So they took them as gods from other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And later on, when the Sahaba who had converted from these adyan, from these religions, came to the Prophet ﷺ and said that we never worshipped them. He was confused about this verse. He said, but we never worshipped them. And the Prophet ﷺ said, didn't you consider halal what they said was halal and consider haram what they said was haram? And he said, yes, that we did do. This was their worship of them. This was their shirk of them. And the same word is used, Allah. And the Rabb, who is the sustainer and maintainer, He only exclusively has the right to legislate. And when someone departs from that, then this is considered shirk. And because a group of them did this, and this was more widespread perhaps than Uzair. Uzair, only some of them said that he's the son of God. Most of them knew that Tawheed is the correct aqidah. But this perhaps was more spread about, Wallahu alam. Therefore, it is mentioned, the concept of shirk is mentioned in the context of Ahlul Kitab. That's actually what I wanted to clarify at this point. Now, the next discussion is longer, therefore we'll not be able to complete it if we were to begin it today, so it's okay if we finish it early. We'll open the floor for questions, inshallah. Subhanahu wa ta'ala.